No, because I'm gonna get him.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, viewers and listeners from coast to coast and worldwide to a very special Tuesday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. This is a live broadcast. Today is Tuesday, September 18th, 2012. And, of course, I'm Doug Hagmann. I'm the founder and director of the Northeast Intelligence Network on the Internet at HomelandSecurityUS.com. With me, as usual, every night is Joe Hagmann. He's my son, and he's the co-host of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. And for the next 2 hours, you're going to hear news, information, analysis, commentary that you will not hear elsewhere, or not elsewhere. Joe, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. I'm real excited about tonight. We have a very special guest. With us is Mr. Larkin Rose, very interesting man. Larkin Rose is a self-described enemy of the state. He is the author of several books, including The Most Dangerous Superstition and The Iron Web, the latter of which was written while he was spending a year as a political prisoner in the
compliments of the U.S. government. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And, which is, by the way, a badge of honor he wears now.
Yeah, from that book, maybe a month ago, we played you a 20-minute YouTube audio clip.
That's right.
That was an excerpt of that book, which was...
It was great. I mean, it said a lot.
Thought-provoking. Yeah. It was very deep, and that's really what got my attention to Mr. Rose. He also is an internationally known outspoken advocate of a stateless society, also known as voluntarism. Mr. Rose lives with his wife Tessa and their daughter Alyssa, if I pronounce that correctly, in eastern Pennsylvania, the same state we are from, where he continues to create videos and articles hacking away at the current paradigm concerning government and authority. Now, you can find his website is larkinrose.com.
That's really difficult, you know.
LARKENROSE.com.
Just like it sounds, which is good.
And with that, we have Mr. Rose on the line with us. Mr. Rose.
Howdy. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Rose, it's our distinct pleasure. Now, I got to tell you, okay, some people listening are going to be a little bit kind of surprised, I think, at your frankness, at your outspokenness.
Yeah, I tend to surprise a fair number of people, but they usually need it. So,
well, look, we and I got to tell you this. Prior to bringing you on today, I've received probably a dozen emails from people saying, "Hey, can you get this guy on your show? Because I really like his video, his YouTube video from his book." And I think I had one ask who's got your book. I'm not exactly sure which one, but said you got to get him on because he's full of good information. So with that, it's good to have you on our program, and I know you're going to be obviously you're going to be talking about some things that a lot of people are just thinking about, but you're going to be articulating them, I'm sure. So I got to ask you first, though. Look, there's a lot of people who seem to really take issue with things that you've said, and I know that you're not an advocate of the income tax system, and if you Google your name or search your name, you're going to find a lot of people that saying, this guy's a shyster, and I get that too. I mean, you search my name, and I've been accused of pretty much everything. So with some notoriety comes that I don't know what you'd call it, that association of or the accusations of guilt, but you don't run from this stuff. You don't hide the fact that you were in trouble for tax fraud, do you?
No, I wrote a book about it. I'm very open about the fact that I spent a year in a cage as a result of not sending pieces of paper to the federal extortion racket. It wasn't tax evasion. It wasn't lying about anything. I wasn't caught doing anything. I stopped filing for a legal reason. Now, it wasn't a tax protest. It wasn't a philosophical refusal. I completely respect the people who do that, who say, I don't want to fund this or that or the other thing, and I'm not giving you my money. That isn't what I did. I rarely talk about the legal issue anymore just because it seems like hardly anybody even wants to look into it. They don't even want to know if I was correct in anything I found. And as you can see, if you Google my name, there's a ton of people just frothing at the mouth with it, tax protester and scam and rah, 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 every nasty thing you could possibly think of. It's sort of a strange scam that I gave away for free and always have. And so they want to paint me as somebody who cheated and got caught, and the government doesn't even do that. I mean, they do their slander against me too.
Of course. But, well, now we approach this just for full disclosure reasons, and also to let everyone know. Look, we know. I mean,
they can come after anybody, and put them in jail. Tax evasion seems to be a charge that they set on you if they cannot get anything else to throw you in jail with.
And look, I got to tell you, Mr. Rose, I was involved in an investigation back 20-some years ago where it really pinched a nominee for the PUC here in Pennsylvania, and as a result, the governor sicked every state agency and the federal agency on me that he could think of, and then some I never even heard of. And what I had to do was, in my office at the time, was actually put a desk there for the influx of state and federal agents that would come in to review our business practices. And after, 3 months or 4 months of investigation every day, they came up with nothing. So, and you know how much damage they can do even if they don't win anything. I mean, just the harassments and the I got my house raided by 12 armed Gestapo goons of the IRS who were there while we're looking for something. And it took me a year and a half to get unsealed the affidavit of probable cause to say, I want to show the world what you think was a justifiable reason for you invading my home. And in it, they said, well, he wasn't hiding his income. He wasn't hiding what he was doing. He wasn't hiding the fact that he stopped filing. He told us that he just says stuff we don't like. Oh, yeah.
And so it was funny because they spent a year and a half trying to keep it secret, and I spent a year and a half saying, no, I want the world to see how big a nasty, evil guy I am that you had to do an armed invasion of my house. Just to clarify, it wasn't even tax evasion. They couldn't even get that for me. They got me on misdemeanor willful failure to file, not sending in pieces of paper. Because tax evasion, they have to show that you lied about something or hid something, and they admitted I didn't do any of that. I told them what I was doing. They knew about my income. So they couldn't even get what they get everybody for, which is tax evasion. They had to back up a level below that and get me for a misdemeanor. Right. And most of the people I was in a minimum security prison, kind of a pretend prison. It's not club fed like some people explain, but it's not scary at all. But half the people were there were like, nah, nobody goes to a prison for a misdemeanor.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
Me and Wesley Snipes, we do. Nobody else does. Nobody else goes to federal prison for a misdemeanor. Well, not quite, but pretty close.
Yeah, and look, the only reason I wanted to bring that up was just to get it out in the open and just with that now, because, look, folks, don't send me emails saying, hey, did you know that you had a guest on? That? Yeah, I did know. We did know. So
yeah, and today with the government so corrupt, with things so out of whack, and
John Corzine's out walking around for crying out loud, and anyway. Okay, here's the deal. You've got your finger on the pulse of world events. It seems like you've got everything.
A detailed knowledge of what's going on with our society, the morals and values, and how those have shifted and are being manipulated and changed, and where we have come from to where we are now and where we are going. You definitely, from what I have read and heard from what you've put out, you are on top of this more than most.
Yeah, top of everything, actually. So why don't you kind of take us through where are we at right now as a nation, as a country? I hate to ask you such an open-ended question, but
well, that works.
Look, we're on the precipice of World War III. We're on the precipice of the greatest financial fraud perpetrated on this country, where I mean, things couldn't be more shaky, rocky, and scary. So, why don't you just start out and let's just talk about where we're at right now as a country and as a people.
Well, I think there's two very different sides of to look at with that. I think we're seeing the end of the U.S. empire. It's coming down. Nothing's going to save it. Nothing. The talking heads or the paper pushers or the control freaks in Washington can do or say is going to keep the empire up. It's going to fall. It's going to go the way Rome went and the way the Soviet Union went, and for many of the same reasons. It's just they overreach and they're going to fall over. The scary thing is how much damage tyrants usually do on the way down, because they grab for power, they jump for complete totalitarianism, they bring out the most fascist, lunatic ideas they can possibly come up with in the hopes of keeping a hold on their power. The good news is it never works. It never, ever works. When the subjects of any regime start to doubt their obligation to bow to the ruling class, brute violence isn't going to keep the people in power for long. The bad news is it's going to hurt a lot of people in the meantime. And what the Federal Reserve is doing and what the government in general is doing with all of its just totalitarian stupidity, just shred the Constitution. It's totally out the window, and we can spy on you, and we can launch a drone at you if in our secret meeting we decide you deserve it, and we can rob you blind, and we can tell you what to do and make you buy this and make you buy that. There's basically any facade of limits on this empire have completely fallen away over the last couple of decades. And so it's going to crash and burn. Unfortunately, it's probably going to hurt a lot of people in the meantime. However, so that's kind of the bad news, is that the empire is falling on its face and nothing is going to stop that from happening. The good news is that while that is happening, there is a growing movement of people who are thinking outside of that box, who are thinking outside of the status box. They're not thinking in terms of what new regime do we put there or who do we elect. They're actually thinking in terms of an actually free society. And if you ask people, almost everybody says, oh yeah, I'm for a free society. And they don't really mean it. They're for freedom light. And they still believe, well, of course we need a gang of people who boss us around a little bit and take our money for the common good and yada, yada, yada. And they accept the idea that there needs to be a ruling class. They'll call it government. They'll say, they don't call it a ruling class because that sounds really bad. It's accurate, but it sounds really bad, so they don't call it that. But there are some people who are finally giving up that entire assumption, that entire game, and saying, all right, when this empire falls down and lands on its face, how can we as human beings create a society, whether we're talking virtual or physical, physically next to somebody, or just a network of people who can trade and interact and get along and have a society where there are no masters and there are no slaves. Basically, there is no government, there are no rulers, there are just people being people. And to most people, even when things get as bad as they are now, that's still a scarier thought than government. Lots and lots of people can point to a million different things wrong with the empire as it is and say, this is wrong, and this is desperate, and this is a crisis, and we have to fix it. But if you say, what if we didn't have a ruling class at all? What if we really were equals? What if we actually believed the thing about all men are created equal and didn't appoint a new master to the throne? And that literally scares more people than the idea of government. But that's starting to change. There are more and more people realizing there isn't a way, and the Constitution was the ultimate proof, there is not a way to make a ruling class that serves those it rules. It's just impossible. We should stop trying to do something impossible and start trying to create a society based on voluntary interaction.
And I mean, to a certain extent, I agree with what you're saying. I understand the the way you see the Constitution as being flawed from the beginning. And in one of your videos I watched, you're right on the money. Slaves were not considered equal. back when the Constitution was drafted, women didn't have the right to vote. There were things that needed fixed, and as time goes on, you put these people of who are making decisions for the rest of the people. We see where this goes, as you said, as in Rome. We look at history. These people of power put themselves above the citizenry and start to give themselves special privileges and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
it starts from there.
I'm not ready to make excuses for the Constitution. Okay.
Oh, I'm not talking about tossing out the Constitution, but it was not a perfect. What I'm saying is it was not a perfect document to begin with. There were flaws.
Yeah, sure, they were repaired through amendments. But what are you suggesting, Mr. Rose? Are you suggesting that we don't have any type of organized rule here? I mean, is that?
Yes, I'm saying do throw out the Constitution. A lot of what the founders said was basically a mixture of brilliant insight it wasn't quite first of its kind, but it was very new to try to create a country based on the idea of unalienable rights and all men are created equal. But then on top of that, they hung on to the old superstition of, so we need somebody in charge, and they have to be able to tax us, and they have to be able to boss us around. We'll call it law. I'm not at all anti-organization, but as soon as you give a group of people permission to rule, as soon as you tell them, okay, you guys have powers that normal people don't, and the Constitution does this. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes and call forth the militia to quell insurrection and regulate interstate commerce. And, it's not a very big list of things that they're allowed to do. But that entire list is a list of things that I don't have the right to do and you don't have the right to do. So it was still an attempt to create a ruling class, a little tiny, supposedly limited ruling class. But the goal was to try to make it, the stated goal was to try to make it so that it would serve the people. And basically, I think it proved that there can't be such a thing. If it has the right to dominate us, even in a small, supposedly limited way, it will turn into a monster. And until that seed is removed, like the Declaration of Independence, great. That was just about all of that was dead on. Well, except where they said governments are instituted among men to protect individual liberty. No, they're not. And they don't ever do that. Never in the history of the world has there been a government that didn't rob its subjects. It's the first thing every government does. It's the first thing the Constitution said. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. In other words, they're allowed to steal because we need them to steal so they can have money to protect us. As soon as you cross that line, it's only a matter of time before it turns into a big, vicious empire, because that line, however small it looks, that's the line that says these people are not bound by basic human morality. They're allowed to do things that everyone would recognize as evil if I did them. And that's why I have one of my YouTube videos is called I'm Allowed to Rob You, where I basically do what the Constitution did and pretend that I can write down, I'm allowed to tax you. It's for your own good and it's legitimate because I wrote it down. As soon as you let them cross that line, in other words, as soon as you accept that there is such thing as a legitimate government, it's going to grow into a big, vicious, destructive empire, and it's not going to help humanity, and it's not going to help the people.
So what do you propose in place of that? I mean, for crying out loud, are you, I think of that movie, or not the movie, but the television series. What is it, Survivor, or where the people get voted off the island type thing?
Yeah, I think Survivor.
Whatever that is, but I mean, what? Just mob rule? I mean,
No, actually, government is mob rule. I don't like mob rule.
Okay, so
here's the difference. Imagine there's a very simple way to put it to start to have people start to picture what it would be like, because people, the word anarchy means a lack of a ruling class. It also means chaos and mayhem. So people associate the two and think, well, if we didn't have a ruling class, there'd be chaos and mayhem. And that isn't true. Here's the way I say to picture it. Imagine if nobody in the world had any rights that you don't have. No cop, no tax collector, no politician, no judge, nobody. If you didn't have the right to do something, nobody has the right to do it. That would be the only difference. You can still organize, you can still cooperate, you can still make large-scale agreements. Hey, we're all going to chip in for this to build a big road or to have a defense system. The only difference is nobody gets to say, I am authority and therefore I have the right to steal. I have the right to boss you around. I have the right to force you to go along with my idea for how we should solve this. Nobody has that right. And the only thing that removing the belief in government does is it removes an exemption from morality. It just says, no, we're all bound by right and wrong. There is no legislation, no constitution, no election, no ritual, no document that can ever give another human being superhuman rights. And when you just mull that over until it sinks in, you start to see what society would be without the imagined deity called government. And it doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean no organization. It doesn't mean no cooperation. And government isn't about cooperation anyway. It's about one group saying, here's what you're going to do or we hurt you. That's not organization or cooperation. It's domination. That's the one thing we don't need in human society, is one group imagined to have the right to forcibly dominate everyone else.
Yeah, and unfortunately, our government has turned into a evil, self-serving entity that has been robbing the people of not only their liberties but their property, their wealth, through a series of throughout history, through a series of different legislations and regulations, whatever they propose. We'll take healthcare, for example, and they're implementing the new healthcare system, but yet they give waivers to their friends.
Okay.
But I know what you're going back to. My father's having a hard time with the concept of...
I'm bleeding out of many orifices right
He's
now.
having a hard time with the concept of the no constitution. But I do understand what you were saying, that rights should be universal, and we should...
and everyone should be happy and have a puppy and roast marshmallows and sing Kumbaya, all right? But it's reality. I mean,
right. This doesn't... Here's the difference. This doesn't make everybody be nice. It doesn't make all disagreements disappear. It doesn't make all disputes disappear. Here's what it would make happen if people stop believing in the God called government. Right now, so far, I've never had my property stolen by private crooks. However, I've had my house and all of my savings and almost everything I own stolen in the name of government. Now, if I asked my neighbors, would you ever rob me personally, they'd all say no. And so far, I've been lucky enough that it's never happened. A few people get robbed privately here and there. You know, that's real life. That doesn't disappear. However, if I ask people, do you vote Democrat or Republican? Oh, yeah. I don't care which. The person you vote for, is he going to demand my money and threaten to cage me if I don't hand it over to fund whatever he thinks should happen? Yes. 200 million of my neighbors advocate that I be robbed because they believe in government. Not because they're evil, not because they do it on their own. They wouldn't. They would be shocked if I would even suggest they would do it on their own. But they've been taught to believe that this thing called government has an exemption from morality. So while they see it would be perfectly nasty and horrible for them to come to my house with a gun and say, you're going to help me pay for my kid's education, they will happily go off and vote for a local school board to go to the township to say, pass a property tax so that somebody else can come to my house with a gun and say, hand over money to pay for his kid's education. Government is the myth that people use to initiate violence against each other and feel no responsibility for doing so. If the only people who tried to rob me is people who would have to say, I am personally robbing you myself and take the responsibility, that would be such a flying leap towards utopia. Instead, millions and millions of people advocate that I be robbed and you be robbed for things we don't like because they think voting and democracy and constitutions and politics makes that okay, makes it civilized and moral. And it's not. That is the myth people need to give up if we're to have an actually free, civilized society.
Yeah, one of the things that really attracted me to the video that was put out from the Iron Web was how you explained how people worship the government, and you really hit some key points with, we are taught from childhood that violence is, never to be used unless somebody is trying to use violence against you, and you say that, but government carries out this violent acts, and I'm real big on the drones. We're droning other countries, we're killing civilians and people in other countries without warrants, evidence, trial, and it's okay. Nobody speaks out about these killings because, as you put it, it is a state-sponsored murder, and they don't feel that the blood is on their hands.
Right. Well, that makes a great example, because look at the whole chain of events. Somewhere you have a guy in his room playing his video game, flying the drone, going and blowing somebody up. Somewhere above him, you have the guy who told him to do that. Somewhere above him, you have the chain of command goes all the way to the top to the president and his people that he meet with every Tuesday morning to decide who to murder. So you have this whole chain of events. Now, maybe at the very top they'd say, well, yeah, I did that, but it was the power vested in me by way of government and the law and authority. I don't think Obama on his own, if he wasn't president, would feel okay about that. Now, I don't trust him a whole lot. Maybe he would. But everybody below him is engaging in that murder, just evil action, because they believe in the thing called authority. The guy who flies it in and blows somebody up that he doesn't know anything about the guy, will use the excuse that government thugs always use. I was just given orders. You can't blame me. Authority told me to do this. It wasn't my idea. I was just doing my job. It's the Nazi defense. And even though at Nuremberg we said that's not good enough, it's still what every single bureaucrat and cop and tax collector and soldier still says when you challenge the morality of their actions. Hey, I was just doing what somebody else told me.
Yeah.
If people give up that belief in authority, give up the idea that they can ever escape responsibility for their own actions. I mean, here's somebody literally killing somebody else and saying, well, it wasn't my idea. Somebody else made the ruling. The order came down from above. Who am I to question it? You're a human being. Human beings should always question. I mean, especially to a degree of killing another human being because somebody told you to. I can imagine a situation in which I would think it was necessary to kill a human being to protect the innocent from an attacker if nothing else would work. But just to do it because somebody else told me to, that's not okay. That is not moral behavior. And that is the result of the belief in authority. People imagining that if you're a cop or if you're a tax collector and some law, some politician, some government says you're supposed to go take that guy's house, or you're supposed to go wipe out his bank account, or you're supposed to drive a drone into his face in the middle of the desert, or you're supposed to kick down his door and drag him away for smoking pot. If people imagine that law and authority can give permission to do things that would be evil if an individual did it, that is literally the direct cause of the vast majority of injustice and suffering, not just now, but going back through all of recorded history. It isn't individuals deciding to be malicious on their own. It's individuals obeying authority when it tells them to go be malicious. And if you do away with that, dealing with the individually malicious people, I think, will be a trivial problem. It's dealing with official, legislated, legalized, authoritarian evil that's the real threat to humanity.
All right. Let me ask you this, Mr. Rose. Would you agree that the country, as it was set up in the Constitution, as amended, is probably the best, not probably, is the best governing document of all countries of the entire world? I mean, wouldn't you believe that? Don't you believe that as an American citizen? Don't you believe that as a person down deep in your heart that our country was divinely inspired and our rights were given to us by God and delineated by a constitution? I mean, isn't that what you believe?
Here's the degree to which I would agree with that, because in a lot of the things the founders said and a lot of the things they wrote down in the Declaration and some of the things they put into the Constitution, they had the idea of unalienable rights that, we don't get them from government. We're born with them. They're inherent.
Right. From
the creator, whatever creator they happen to believe in. They didn't even believe in the same one amongst themselves, but they all acknowledge these rights. They're not the result of political action. They are above that.
Right.
And to me, that is a huge step forward to say there are rules of right and wrong that are inherent to humanity or the universe or whatever you want to say it, that outrank government and authority and legislation. That was a gigantic step in the right direction. And so that part, I think, was outstanding. However, they couldn't let go of the idea of a ruling class. And so they said, so we're going to make a ruling class that is somehow in line with the idea of unalienable rights and things like that, but there can't be such a thing. And basically they proved it by trying to create a little tiny limited ruling class which grew into the biggest empire the world has ever known. Not in terms of land, but in terms of raw power, military power and the extortion racket and the regulatory arm, all of that. That little seed, despite the pieces of significant wisdom that the founders had and that they put out there, the little seed of authoritarianism was doomed to grow into this monster. And the Anti-Federalists saw it, and they said it. People like Jefferson and Patrick Henry and Thomas Paine were saying, this is going to turn into a giant monster. If you read the Constitution, I'm amazed that any of them could read that and say, this is going to turn into a huge monster, because it doesn't sound like a huge monster. If you read the Constitution, it sounds like this little tiny, weak, trivial thing that nobody would ever have to worry about. And that's what the Federalists said it was going to remain. And obviously, they were completely wrong.
Right. But they left the obligation to keep it the way it was supposed to be, to keep it right, on the citizens. They left the burden on the population. And unfortunately, that population was and has been and continues to be manipulated through from our investigation, and we're private investigators
by profession. That's
by
right.
profession, and we've just recently got into radio in the last couple of years, and we've noticed the shadow governments, the people behind the scenes, the real ruling class that pulls the strings, no matter who.
Puppet masters, yeah.
Well, let's talk about them. I mean, because I have a feeling we're kind of there's a pretty big chasm here between us with respect to, well, look, I believe that if we went back to the Constitution as amended and the Bill of Rights, and if we had a pure government, without the if we followed it as intended. In other words, if guys would start reading the instruction manuals,
Can I say something that'll make your blood pressure go up even more?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And I often say this to constitutionalists. In what way is that different from what communists argue? Which is, well, it didn't turn out right when applied to reality, but that's because they didn't do it right. If the Constitution, as applied to reality with human nature in the real world, equals the biggest, most violent empire the world has ever known, why would going back to the same idea and trying it again be a good idea?
No, I understand the point, but with the Constitution,
he asked me a question, but if you want to take that,
well,
I guess go ahead.
I thought you were doing something. Go ahead.
No, I mean, communism is a system. By definition, it's a system of societal organization that has everybody owning all the property in common, actual ownership being ascribed to the community as a whole by the state or to the state itself. So it's an economic and social system.
It's a controlled,
but there's no inherent there's no inherent motivation for people to do anything in a communistic society, is
Right. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I have an article. Actually, the most recent version was called Obama Mania, where I actually go into why communism is evil and insane.
Right.
My point isn't that it's the same philosophy, but that it's a similar excuse to say, well, the Constitution, it got corrupted and people did nasty things, and so it turned out this way. Well, if applied to real life with, the good people and the bad people and the reality and whatever,
Right.
Because what the communists describe as their utopia they're hoping to achieve is not what Stalin ended up with. That's not what anybody describes as what they want. And then they say, well, the problem wasn't with communism, it's that they didn't do it right. That's why you get Stalin and Mao, because they didn't do it right. But if there's a theory applied to reality that turns out wrong every time, maybe the theory's wrong. And I'm saying the theory of limited government is completely wrong. The fundamental assumption behind it is completely wrong, which is why it didn't work the first time and wouldn't work the second time or the 100th time.
Well, how in the world would no government work?
That's the question. The way of looking at society that has to change is actually, if you look between most of history, like compare most of history to the Constitution, and then the Constitution, compare that to anarchism or voluntarism or whatever you want to call it, that last step in one sense is very tiny, because what the Constitution describes, the powers were very small and limited. What if we say, for example, Congress can't tax? They can ask for money and we can decide to give it to them if we think they're doing a good job. And they can regulate in the sense of, making standards and measures and whatever, but they can't punish people for not doing things the way they wanted. The wording wouldn't have to change very much to describe an actual voluntary contract, but the fundamental nature would change enormously if you take out the idea that Congress has any right to do anything that I don't have the right to do or you don't have the right to do. So a world without government doesn't mean a world without agreements. It doesn't mean a world without cultures and societies and collective action and collective funding for things that people decide should be, if people want to chip in to buy a bridge and something like that, that's all perfectly fine. The one ingredient that has to be removed is the idea that there can be a legitimate ruling class. And if you do away with that, a lot of society can stay just the way it is, only it'll be a lot better because there won't be a big parasite stuck on top of it, robbing everybody and getting in their way.
Yeah, and I want to add to your point, Mr. Rose, that as a society, the morals of our society today are just so corrupt. And as society continues to become more corrupt, so does the government. And we see, directly in line with the way society seems to unravel morally and how the government became, corrupt. Those seem to go hand in hand. And whether the shadow government planned it to happen this way, by pushing these what you call offensive and immoral ideas, shoving them down our throat, whatever the case is, it seems to go hand in hand that a content, complacent society, especially one that now lacks pretty much all morals in a sense of right and wrong, we see the government, takes advantage of that, and it is not fair to the citizens, as you are saying, with regard, especially, that they have the right to all the property. They've taken away our right to our own private property. They've, now they can tax us, and they set up the IRS in 1934. And we see how the Constitution went from being the what I believe is a divinely inspired document also, but man has corrupted it in a sense that the people who are in charge are just as corrupt as the people in society. And until we can learn how to fix the morals of people, I don't think we'll ever have any perfect form of government or society at all.
Well, what if the cause and effect goes in the other direction? For example, in society today, if you stub your toe on somebody's front step, if you're lucky and get a good lawyer, you can sue them and get $1 million. That is the legal system and government and the belief in authority saying there's a way to get $1 million that's perfectly fine. Now, most people who do that wouldn't feel okay about breaking in and just stealing $1 million, but morally, it's the exact same thing. You hire a lawyer and rob somebody blind for something where they didn't do anything wrong. You just were stupid enough to injure yourself somewhere. That teaches people that there isn't really such thing as property rights and that whatever you can get away with is just fine. The welfare state teaches people that you're entitled to other people's money. If you need it, it's yours, the basis of communism. Of course, this is going to breed immorality because it destroys everything upon which morality is based, which has to do with the individual owning himself, which means he owns the fruits of his labor, and that's where property rights come from. The moment you create a system that says, well, there's an exemption from that, maybe you should get free money for sitting around on your butt. And maybe it's okay to go blow people up if you get told to. These teach people that things like thou shalt not murder, there are exemptions to that. Thou shalt not steal, there are exemptions to that. Thou shalt not bear false witness, there are exemptions to that. Government teaches people, never mind morality and right and wrong in your own judgment, whatever you can get authority to do for you is perfectly fine. So it doesn't surprise me at all that a nation that thinks more and more in that direction is going to be a nation of short-sighted, selfish, nasty boneheads because they're being trained to be short-sighted, nasty boneheads by the ruling class. And I think some of it's intentional and, conspiratorial, but I think some of it's just sort of the natural event or the natural result of a big, powerful empire where you learn, we grow up learning that if you want something, you go whine to government and maybe they'll beat somebody over the head and take it from them and give it to you. That's how people learn how to be human beings. So of course they're going to turn into these greedy, short-sighted thieves.
Okay. Now, here's the situation, and I've got to just let me jump in here, okay? Because here's where I see where we're at right now. We're facing World War III.
Yeah, economically, politically.
Yeah. Okay. We are, regardless of how you want to paint things, and I respect your opinion on things, and I certainly your ideology behind the one video we played. Look, I agree with you 100%. I agree about the corruption of man and the all of this. But as we sit here today on the 18th day of September 2012, we're facing World War III. We're facing economic collapse. We're facing trouble over in the South China Sea between Japan and China. We're facing we're looking at a potential civil war here in this country, a revolution, if you will. We've got we've got a responsibility for our listeners and to tell them, look, here's what's going on right now. So that said, okay, where do you stand in all this? I mean, you've got some pretty good ideology. I mean, some good ideology in that video you made. I mean, what's going on here? What's your interpretation? I mean, we've got puppet masters behind the puppets. We've got the false right-left paradigm. We've got all of this going on. But, it's one thing to address the problems and to identify the